This photo was taken in 2022, capturing the swearing-in ceremony of King Charles III in the British Parliament. In the photo, the neatly aligned and shiny bald heads of the parliamentarians unexpectedly became a focal point, sparking lively discussions among netizens. This seemed to confirm the British notion of a prevalent inheritance of the baldness gene. However, looking back through history, if these parliamentarians had lived a few centuries earlier, they might not have felt embarrassed about their baldness. From the 17th to the early 19th century, the nobility embraced a nearly 300-year tradition of wearing wigs. Wearing wigs was once an essential part of etiquette in aristocratic society, required not only in public gatherings, but also when hosting guests at home, much like clothing and shoes today. Initially, wigs were available in a variety of colors, such as gold, brown, and black, depending on personal preference. However, starting from the early 18th century, the color of wigs gradually standardized to white. Wearing white wigs became fashionable for both men and women, with it particularly becoming a mandatory ceremonial norm for men. Even today, the tradition of wearing white wigs is still preserved in some European countries, especially in British courts, where the wigs worn by lawyers and judges are most famous. However, these wigs have become quite rigid and stiff over time. Compared to the once vibrant wig fashion that flourished for 300 years, the current styles are less flattering. The history of wigs in the West indeed has deep roots, with records dating back to ancient Rome, where wigs often appeared in the form of hairpieces and extensions, mainly serving as beauty products. Additionally, some people wore wigs out of physiological necessity, for instance, to cover baldness caused by illness or to manage untreatable head lice by shaving the head. The ancient Egyptians were particularly renowned for wearing wigs, leaving behind extensive pictorial records that became a signature cultural feature of ancient Egypt. Egyptians refined wig-making techniques to perfection, using materials such as linen, wool, various types of animal hair, and the most expensive wigs were made from human hair. The most luxurious wigs worn by pharaohs and queens were crafted from human hair and beeswax and adorned with gold and ribbons, showcasing the high status of wigs in Egyptian society. The popularity of wigs often required the endorsement of fashion leaders, and there were several notable figures who influenced wig trends. In England, Queen Elizabeth I was famous for her striking red wigs, which became her iconic adornment and set a fashion trend during her reign. Historical accounts vary regarding her initial reasons for wearing wigs. Some suggest she turned to wigs due to hair loss from smallpox, while others believe she never suffered from hair loss and wore wigs purely as a fashion statement. Queen Elizabeth I personally owned about 80 wigs in red or auburn, imitating her natural hair color. Her example led to the widespread popularity of wigs at the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century, a trend that continued into the reign of her successor, James I. Anne of Denmark, the queen of King James I, favored a curly, light golden hairstyle that so impressed the Venetian ambassador during his visit to the English court in 1617 that he reported back home, describing her headgear as composed of many shining wigs adorned with extremely precious diamonds and other jewels, making her look like a sunflower. Following Queen Elizabeth I, King Louis XIII of France was another monarch who brought wigs back into fashion. Louis XIII turned to wigs out of necessity due to severe hair loss caused by illness, which compelled him to wear a wig from the age of 32 onwards. He chose a popular style among men at the time, the medium-length parted curls, to cover his receding hairline. Although Louis XIII himself was not particularly concerned with fashion and had limited influence in that realm, his reign set the stage for a fashion giant who would elevate male fashion to unprecedented heights, his son, Louis XIV, known as the Sun King. Louis XIV's embrace of lavish fashion, including elaborate wigs, had a lasting impact on French and European court styles, which continues to be recognized to this day. Louis XIV played an extremely important role in the fashion of wigs, turning the wearing of wigs into a trend and a mark of etiquette. Under his influence, wigs became a widespread phenomenon across Europe, firmly establishing the foundation of wig fashion. As a youth, Louis XIV had a head of curly, dense, golden brown hair. However, at the age of 18, he contracted a severe illness. The detoxifying agents used for treatment had side effects, leading to his hair loss before the age of 30, which necessitated his wearing of wigs. Louis XIV never shaved his head completely. Instead, he mixed his natural hair with the wig to make it look as natural as possible. Louis XIV's personal wig maker, Benoit Benet, was highly skilled in crafting wigs. He led a team that collected hair samples from the king and traveled across the countryside to purchase natural hair that matched the king's hair in color and curliness. Because rural women, who often worked long hours under the sun, had tougher hair than urban women, their hair was particularly valued. Benet was known for his dedication, famously stating, "I will search the nation for the hair to adorn His Majesty's head." Louis XIV owned over 3,000 wigs of various styles, each meticulously crafted from real hair. Each wig required the long hair from 50 peasant women to complete, and 40 wig technicians were employed at the court to maintain his wigs daily, cleaning them, powdering them, and keeping them in shape. Due to the Sun King's influence, regardless of his initial intentions, the nobility eagerly adopted the fashion of wearing wigs. This somewhat humorous and serendipitous reason turned wigs into a staple accessory for the nobility. By the mid-17th century, wigs began to spread from the French court outward, swiftly sweeping through Paris and subsequently infecting all of Europe. Nobles no longer wore wigs merely to cover up hair loss, but to signify their aristocratic status. The wig-making industry boomed, becoming popular across Europe, where wearing a wig became synonymous with nobility, generating immense profits. However, not everyone could enter this trade. It required a royal patent to legally produce and sell wigs. Wigs vary in material quality, with human hair being the preferred choice and blonde hair being the most expensive, costing around £1,000 per piece. There are also more affordable options, such as blends of human hair and horsehair. The nouveau riche of the bourgeoisie also followed the trend and began wearing wigs, and eventually, even the common townsfolk wore them for the sake of appearance. A London wig merchant once complained, "One day, a man wearing a wig came into my shop, and I treated him like a gentleman, only to find out later that he was just an apprentice from the tailor shop at the corner of the street." What a world, where anyone can play the Lord just by wearing a wig. This anecdote illustrates the extent to which wigs were popular. For 200 years, every respectable gentleman, regardless of age, wore a wig when he stepped outside. For convenience, most men chose to simply shave their heads. Thus, while men appeared distinguished with their wigs during the day, by night, the majority were actually bald. By the early 18th century, the color of wigs had gradually unified to white. There are several explanations for the popularity of white wigs, one of the most credible being that the nobility particularly revered the color white as it symbolized purity and cleanliness. White demonstrated the nobility's ability to maintain a clean appearance, which aligned with their preference for pale skin and white linen shirts, reflecting a lifestyle almost untouched by manual labor. Between 1730 and 1740, France continued to set the fashion tone for Europe, and fashion was evolving. Shorter, lighter, and fully white wigs emerged. In France, this trend coincided with the reign of Louis XV, while in England, it occurred during the reign of King George III. Men's wigs gradually evolved into the ponytail style, familiar today, which involved securing the wig with a hairnet and bow at the back of the head. This style persisted until after the French Revolution, marking the last great period of male wig fashion on the historical stage. Powdering the wig with white powder, actually made from potato starch, was an essential process. Because there was no known method to permanently fix color to wigs at the time, stylists had to repowder the wigs daily. Women's wigs also reached their peak during the Rococo period, particularly driven by Marie Antoinette's influence, which popularized high wigs after 1780. However, when it came to white wigs, women seemed not to fully embrace whitening their hair completely, preferring a grayish-white hue instead. The white wig, as a symbol of purity, was adopted by several professions: judges, lawyers, notaries, clergy, and military officers, all of whom needed to project an image of impeccable moral integrity. As a symbol of wealth and social belonging, it was also mimicked by all those trying to present themselves as having a higher status, such as the bourgeoisie or gentlemen. The French Revolution ended the aristocracy's tradition of wearing wigs, as stepping out with one became akin to shouting to the executioner, "I am a noble, come and behead me." However, in European countries that did not experience the revolution, the tradition of wearing wigs continued into the 1810s. British judges and lawyers still maintain this tradition today, likely the last vestige of this type of wig.